Welcome to part 2 of episode 141 of the Working Conversations podcast. If you caught episode 141, you will know that I had the opportunity to interview my son as he turns 25. My son, Apple Crider, otherwise known as Andrew Crider to me, because that was his birthday, but he goes by Apple Crider, and he runs a company called Creators Agency, which we talked all about at the beginning of episode 141. And this is part 2, or the bonus content that goes along with episode 141. I had the opportunity to ask him a bunch of questions in the episode, and now we're going to turn the tables and he's going to ask me a few questions. So I will turn it over to you, my dear son, to ask me some questions.
Incredible. So happy to be here. I haven't been in the asking questions seat of the podcast world in a few years. So I'm gonna try my best. But yeah, I would love to just start it off and hear a bit about how the last 25 years have kind of gone for you. Because we kind of talked about from my standpoint what I've kind of learned and the advice that I would give. But I guess kind of let's flash back 25 years on your timeline and walk the listeners through kind of how your life's gone.
All right. Wow. That's a great question. All right. So 25 years ago today, I'd be having a baby, and that would forever change my world. I would have gone from not being a parent to being a parent, obviously, if we're going exactly 25 years back in time. And that was a huge, monumental moment in terms of how your life changes. And at the time, I was also working on my PhD at Purdue. And so I was, both grad student and teaching some undergrad classes. And now I'm a parent to an infant. So that was a lot on my plate 25 years ago. I would say it has incrementally gotten easier over time, although there are probably some points at which it got more complicated or more complex over time as well. So I think my journey in a certain way is very interesting in that I thought I was going to be a college professor, and I thought I was going to retire being a college professor. And I would say my answer to this question maybe is similar to your answer to a question that I asked you, but that I was always kind of had my eyes open and was curious about things. And listeners who've been with the podcast for a long time and have listened to episode 1, where I tell my career story, will know that I made all kinds of various choices, teaching study abroad classes and bouncing around between academic institutions and then into a corporate role and then into entrepreneurship. So I would say, in sum, answering the question of how the last 25 years gone for me, it is a process of watching for the next interesting thing. And like, is there something that I like better than what I'm doing now? And then when you find those things, like doubling down on them and really doing more of what you love. And sometimes that comes at a cost, though. Sometimes you got to let go of something that you kind of like doing, or maybe you really love doing, but you're just not that good at, and you have to hire somebody else to do it for you. I think some of those can feel like almost heart-wrenching choices, but I would say continuing to double down on the things that bring me the most joy and that contribute to creating the kind of life that I am creating and a life that I love.
Yeah. So with that, how did your decision-making process or like the factors that you weigh in terms of like evaluating new opportunities, how did that change when you became a parent? Because I'm sure that the things that you were thinking about probably evolved a little bit. So walk us through kind of some of those changes that happened and how you were kind of thinking about things.
Yeah, well, I have always wanted to be the parent who's not going to let children limit the choices that I make in my life. And so I don't know how much you remember this, but you were like 2 and 3 and 4 when I was teaching classes in study abroad classes in Ireland and London, and, dragging you along, not necessarily for the whole time I was there, but, you'd come and join in the end of it. And I mean, you were little being pushed around in a stroller, but, seeing Buckingham Palace and, a bunch of things like that. I have to believe that some of that early travel is is part of what stayed with you and piqued your curiosity, that you continue to be a world traveler, even having been a world traveler as young as like 2 or 3 years old. So there's part of being a parent that I wanted to just like take in stride and say, I don't want to feel like I'm making choices at the expense of what I want to be doing because of parenthood. I want to blend them together and create a life that where both work. Now, I will also say there was one particular inflection point in my life where it was a challenging thought process about parenthood, possibly having more children, and a career choice. And at this time, I was in a corporate role and I was at the director level. So, I was managing a pretty decent budget and staff, and my staff was traveling all over the globe, and I was traveling all over the globe. And I had an opportunity to go to Switzerland and relocate to Switzerland for a couple of years. And at that time, we had just moved into the house on Minnehaha Parkway and hadn't yet remodeled or added on. Your younger brother and sister were not yet born, but were being thought about. And so there was this decision point of, do we move to Switzerland? Do we add on to the family and the house? There was all these different decisions, and some of them were like, well, if you go down the Switzerland path, it's going to be pretty hard. I mean, first of all, it would be like, no, can't remodel the house from Switzerland. That would just that one part was an easy no. That was an easy no. But then it was like the more complicated factors of, if we move to Switzerland, what does parenting look like for you? And then what does that mean for having more children? And I certainly wasn't getting any younger. I was getting to sort of the age where it was make or break, have more kids or don't have more kids. And so that really was a decision point where, do I put my career first or do I put my family first? And the career part also included global travel and relocating to a different country for a few years, which I would have absolutely loved. And I made the choice in that case, family first. I wouldn't do it differently at all. It is the right decision. I'm so glad I made that decision. But that would be an example of, a moment where being a parent did impact a career decision and a life decision that I made.
I think I ever knew that. Did I ever know that there's the possibility of us moving to Switzerland?
Well, you would have been all over it. You would have just been, you were. I mean, wow. And these are sometimes, so this also brings up an interesting thing about parenthood is like, sometimes the parents are having conversations that the children have no idea that they're having, because you really don't want the kid's opinion in the mix, because that could complicate factors or lead to great disappointment. I mean, because I think, finding out that you could have moved to Switzerland but didn't might have been disappointing at that age, but also moving to Switzerland at that age might have been really disappointing because you get pulled from all of your friends and, sports teams and everything else that you were up to at that time. So sometimes parents have to have those conversations, even when you want to be like the most democratic parent and keep your kids involved in all the major decisions that are affecting the family. Sometimes you just can't. I think, let me just also say, because a lot of people who are listening may not necessarily be parents, but maybe managers in their company. I think the same is true for leaders. Sometimes you got to make these decisions without letting the employees necessarily know what's going on, making some tough decisions. And maybe they never know what the options were until they're 25 years later. Or some number of years later. But sometimes we just gotta, and it's tough because, like, I'm sure I probably wanted to, like, I was probably bursting at the seams to say, oh, wouldn't it be exciting to move the family to Switzerland?
No, I think it's, I agree with that decision wholeheartedly. Like, I think that I really had no business being involved in that at all. And I think that I would, with my non-fully developed brain, would have just been all over the place and been like, oh my gosh, yes, we have to do that. And now we thought about the consequences of like, oh wow, I'd be leaving like all of my friends for like years, and like those are like really formative years where it's like that's where you're kind of like building these relationships and these friendships that can last a really long time. So from my standpoint, for what it's worth, all those years later, I support the decision. I think that was a good call.
Well, thank you, because I feel good about it too. I would not take a mulligan on that one, not at all.
That's great. That's great. Well, I guess okay. So looking in our conversation, we were looking into the past a little bit and talking about what advice that I would give to my past self or would give to my younger siblings. I kind of want to flip it a little bit and talk about the future. So looking into the future a little bit, like I'm probably going to have kids of my own at some point. And so I would love to pick your brain for maybe a piece or two of advice from your standpoint, looking forward into my future a little bit, knowing what you know about me, what advice would you give me about kind of moving into that chapter? And no worries, it's not going to be anytime soon, so no surprises to be had here. But looking into the future, years into the future, what advice would you be able to share with me?
Oh, that's a good question. And I'm also glad that it's not going to be like anytime real soon, because I'm not quite ready to be a grandma yet. I know I'm old enough technically to be a grandma by far, but I'm not quite ready for that chapter yet. Advice that I would give you would be, well, I would say some of the same things that we were talking about in that last conversation about don't make any presuppositions about who this kid is going to be, because I think it's so easy to think that a child is going to behave the same way that you behaved, either at that age or just in general. And I think that's one of the joys of parenthood, when you can take a step back from that and say, like, okay, I'm not going to presuppose that this kid is going to be like me at all. Maybe they are, or maybe they aren't. I mean, and to be fair, when you were young, we were, I mean, I think we still are a lot alike, but I used to joke that we shared half a brain because I, um, because there was just like so many times we were in simpatico, but you can't necessarily expect that that's always going to be the case, because I have two other children, and sometimes that's the case and sometimes it's so not the case with your siblings. I would also say the same advice that I would give you this advice is, don't let parenthood get in the way of who you are. And I mean, you are a world traveler, you are an explorer. And so, and I would say find the way to balance that, because I wouldn't want you to give that up. But also there are times at which that's going to work really well, like summer breaks, or before kids start school, when they're little. And so taking advantage of some of those moments in time to still be true to who you are, and making sure you're not making sacrifices that would leave you end up feeling resentful or held back by your choice to have children. And just finding creative ways to blend kids with the rest of your life.
Any tips on how to do that? Because like that all sounds so good in theory. I'm like, yes, of course, like that's what I want to do as a parent. Like I don't want to like have to feel like, okay, now my identity is like a parent, and like that's like it, because like right now my identity has so many different facets. And so I have like known some people, like some of my peers have like gone on to like become parents already, and like for some of them, like their identity kind of just collapses into like, now I am a parent. And they kind of lose out on a lot of those other aspects. So like that's definitely like dream scenario and something that I've been thinking about. But like any advice on like how to actually like make sure that happens, from like how to make those kinds of decisions, or just like make sure that like you're still able to like find those other pieces of your life and make sure that those can still kind of like coexist?
Well, I would say here, we'll take a quote from, I believe this is Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. He says to look for the helpers. So look for the helpers. So when we went to Ireland for the first time, when you were little, we brought your babysitter along. And so I don't know, the look on your face tells me you don't remember that. But we brought your babysitter along for the week. So I was teaching in Ireland for about 3.5 weeks, and you and your dad and the babysitter came for the last week that I was teaching, and that gave you a chance to get over the jet lag and everything like that while I was still teaching. And then we had, family time together, vacationing, and did some touring around Ireland. And then we went over to and spent some time in London. And because we had the babysitter along, that gave your dad and I a lot more freedom of things that we could do. And we didn't always have to be structuring our outings around your nap time, because if it was your nap time, you'd go back to it wasn't Airbnb then, but the flat that we were renting with the babysitter, and take your nap while your dad and I continued to explore. The following year, so I taught in Ireland again, and then we went straight to London. I met up with you and your dad and my parents, your grandparents, in London. and we hung for a week in London. And again, we had the grandparents there as support, so that if your dad and I wanted to do something, whatever. And there's a very, very, very funny story where we were in, we're all on I don't know if we were picnicking or we were just in this beautiful park in London. And your grandpa Bob, my dad, always used to say, "We're going to London to see the Queen. We're going to London to see the Queen." And so there's this old woman walking through the park wearing a very long coat. It wasn't, it did not look like royalty at all. She looked very, very shabby. She walks by us and you're like, "Is that the Queen?" But we had them there along as helpers. So I would say, like, I guess maybe the overarching theme of this is don't go it alone. And, whether that's you and your spouse or partner and kids, but don't go it alone. Look for the helpers, whether that would be, I would love to accompany you and your growing family to any part of the world that you wanted to travel to and help you in any way I could. But whether it is an au pair or the babysitter that you bring along or finding somebody locally. I mean, most hotels offer babysitting services. And that's all like vetted and, insured and all that kind of stuff. So you're not just sort of picking somebody off Craigslist in some random country.
Wow.
So
I had no idea. I'm learning so much about just like our family history and just like these experiences that I had no idea were even like going on or that just like escaped my 2-year-old brain, So
well, the next time you're home, I'll show you some. We'll go through some old photos, and you can see yourself in a stroller, in a stroller using a very probably primitive iPad type device because you didn't want to go to all the museums and do all those things. You're sitting in a stroller with a tablet computer watching Teletubbies or something.
Oh my gosh, that adds up for sure. Oh man, wow, this is awesome. No, I feel I feel very prepared. Well, not very prepared, but more prepared than I was before this conversation. To look at that kind of next chapter of life. I guess before we wrap, like any other, as from your vantage point, kind of seeing me kind of grow and develop over the last 25 or so years. Any piece of advice that you would care to share now? I guess just like now that I'm out of the house, we don't have as many opportunities for you to transmit information into my head. And now that I am 25, theoretically my brain should be fully developed. So I'm probably in the best position possible to actually receive any advice that you do want to share. I'm sure plenty of the pieces of information you've tried to pass on to me over the last couple decades have just kind of bounced off here and there. So now that we got a fully developed brain, any piece of advice that you'd want to leave with?
I mean, my whole life philosophy is first know yourself and then find people to surround yourself with that you love and enjoy, and then find meaningful work. And I think that you are doing a fantastic job at all of that. As you know yourself, I think it's important, and I'm giving this advice to myself as well as to you, but it's important to know yourself, and then knowing yourself, look at where might an asset turn into a detriment. So where are you maybe really good at something, but if you get so good at it or you do so much of it, it actually holds you back. So we could go back to the example of you in observer mode. There are times when it's great to be in observer mode and it's really helpful and it gives you all of the intel that you need to confidently move into the next step. But where might there be times where that holds you back and you miss an opportunity because you're too busy gathering the intel to actually take action? And then when you were to take action, the opportunity is passed. So, and I don't necessarily mean to apply it just to that specific situation, but I think for all of us, where are the opportunities to keep ourselves in check, where something that is maybe a superpower of ours can get in the way of whether it's opportunity cost or something else holding us back in some fashion. And I think that's easier said theoretically than actually done. It requires a lot of taking stock. It requires reflecting on decisions that we've made and how they've went, or how they've gone rather. And it also requires, reflecting on things that we either didn't take action on, because I mean, no action is still action. It's the action of status quo. That's the action. So I think sometimes we end up holding ourselves back because of our own superpowers. So that would be my advice to you, to myself, and to anyone else who's listening.
I'm definitely gonna have to sit with that and let it soak in. But before we do it, let's wrap it. So where can people find more about you? Where's the best place for them to follow up with Dr. Janel Anderson? And where should they go if they want to kind of take the next steps?
All right, I love it. You're asking me that question because they're probably watching this on my YouTube channel, but certainly YouTube, the podcast Working Conversations, which you can find wherever you get podcasts. You can also find it right here on my YouTube channel. And you can follow me on Instagram at Janel Anderson, PhD. And my website is drjanelanderson.com. And I would love to come and speak at your organization, your event, your association, and share some ideas about the future of work with you.
Lovely.
And how about for you? Where can they find you?
Yeah, Creators Agency is our company. So creatorsagency.co is the website. You can find all the good stuff there.
All right. Again, thank you so much for listening. This is part 2 of episode 141 of the Working Conversations podcast, where I had the opportunity to interview my son. And thank you so much for tuning in to listen to him turn the tables and interview me. All right. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.